Welcome back. It's a good night for a story. We'll keep you company. Thanks for listening and or watching. Now, tonight's tale. When a bear terrorizes Yellowstone, park rangers must move quickly. But Ranger Trevor Raines begins to wonder, what kind of animal would only target children? Patches. A teddy bear takes its name from Theodore Teddy Roosevelt, 26th President of the United States. So the story goes, the politician was at a press junket wherein a captured bear would be the day's hunt. Teddy, finding no sport in this arrangement, had the animal mercifully released. Nowadays, childhood just isn't childhood without receiving at least one teddy bear on some special occasion or holiday. Which brings us by way of tidy summary to the Summers family, camping under the clear-eyed stars inside one of Yellowstone National Park's more remote stretches. Authorities cautioned against such encampments this late in the season. Thanks to the work of conservationists, bear season had been growing longer and longer as their 21st century population rebounded from its 19th and 20th century woes. Summer Summers, her father refusing any other naming for his 6-year-old daughter, was bedding herself down in the family RV. The cackling of the adults and preteens outdoors gathered around a crackling fire pit. Dad was telling one of his famous campfire stories, more renowned for bust-a-gut jokes than any genuine scares. Remote campfires had also been discouraged in the pamphlets they'd received upon paying the park fees 3 days earlier. But the unread info found its way onto the dashboard right next to the smiling cartoon visage of Smokey Bear and his shovel. So far as victuals being locked up high and tight, well, you might have already guessed that burgers and hot dogs lay around the campsite as plentifully as graham crackers, marshmallows, and Hershey's. People undergo a strange delusion when in the wild, wherein they reassure themselves large, loud groupings will repel anything up to and including Bigfoot. Sure, we'll douse the campfire after supper. Yeah, we'll lock up the cookies and potato chips before we hit the sack, they always tell themselves. Then, sure enough, the beer and wine coolers have their way, and soon everyone's too tired to be bothered. It's almost as if bears know this weakness about us. They know, and they wait. The tender child turned out her nightlight and closed gentle eyelids, reopening a moment later like sprung mousetraps. Where was Teddy? She groped around her sides for the soft feel of his plush fur. It was nowhere to be found. Summer's head poked straight up inside her brother's varsity basketball jersey. Jake had been named team captain this year. "Teddy?" she called out, sure the toy would answer her from under some game table or front seat. The little girl made regular habit of slipping her bear under a strawberry shortcake pillowcase. But tonight, nothing. She and an older cousin, Sassy, had dressed her teddy bear in a little sailor's life jacket and gone out onto the lake that very afternoon. Had she really gone and left it down there? No, she was sure she'd brought him back. Indeed, the wee life jacket was resting right over there on Uncle Gary's open guitar case. Still, what if she had? She surely couldn't stomach the thought of the poor old bear shivering out there in the nighttime cold, all on its own. Something inside Summer's guts told her not to go out there alone, screaming at her, "You dare not sneak out." She ignored this warning. After all, she'd just go for a quick peek, back before anyone could object, none the wiser. She gathered herself quietly and crept outdoors through a silver sliver in the screen door. The hanging moonlight was freezing, her bare arms immediately washing over with shivery goose pimples and tiny raised hairs. She'd remembered to wear her Sesame Street slippers, so at least her feet were safe from rocks and nettles along the path. The blue plastic of her footfall made scraping, scrubbing sounds with each step she took, the firelight and laughter fading into a distant memory in the backdrop. Now where was that paddle boat launch anyways? The moon had made a bright runway stripe of its own reflection over the lake. Ahead, Summer caught sight of an orange and red canoe through the boughs and branches. "Teddy?" Her sweet voice was a lost angel through the trees. She stepped onto the sodden, squishy logs of the launch, reaching the end where the canoe was tethered. It was violently shorn in two halves, her bear floating across the surface next to the pieces. She knelt over the edge far as she was able, drawing her drowning toy from its liquid grave, freeing its blind, painted eyeballs from waterlogged moss and other assorted oozes. In the forest wall behind was a pair of equally lifeless eyeballs, stalking with contempt, watching with scorn. It had matted ears, a neglected, forgotten plaything. Fraying hems and stitched patchwork covered a hide of synthetic fur no less than 9 feet tall, 12 when it wasn't hunched over something dead. The girl smelt danger, wheeling on her heels to find a hulking shape waiting at the end of the dockside. Her immediate thought was that this was someone in a costume. Maybe they were lost, looking for directions to whichever amusement park, carnival, or fair from whence they'd strayed. Maybe she could help. The beast took a rangy step forward. Even a soul as young as Summer knew when her life had met its end. She couldn't escape. Water was at her backside, and no one had taught her to swim yet. Sassy said she was going to before school started this year. She'd promised. After another step, the child recalled she could still scream, thrusting her teddy bear in front of her chest like a Templar knight his shield or broadsword. The demon reacted instantly, loosing a twisted paw and a wicked maw, deflating her lungs before the air could stretch to her vocal cords. The toy's fate was the same as its owner. One half floated upriver, the other playing along shoreline rocks and pebbles. Ranger Trevor Raines was busy unlocking guest latrines at the visitor complex when he first heard the call coming from the cab of his pickup truck's CB. Bear attack. Little girl named Summer Summers. This would be his first such action, although there'd been a fatality in early April, right after Easter, sadly. He'd been hired in May. His boss was already on site. Irene, an 89-pound red-headed hen that looked as old as she weighed. She'd been chief for the better part of a decade, Trevor had been told, and was quite a pistol. Honest, though. Tough, but honest. Reminded him of his granny on his ma's side, actually. Irene was a rancher's widow, never had any kids, so this park, the rangers, and all the animals inside were her family now. The rims of his 4x4 pulled alongside a ranger's jeep. As he walked up, he found the scene quieter than a forest had any right to be. His superior was sitting on a fallen log next to John Summers, weeping silently together. She'd stopped trying to take the father's statement, and he'd stopped trying to give it. Irene hid her eyeline, embarrassed, handing over a black slicker and pointing at the RV. "Please hurry," she barely managed to whisper. Family members were collected nearby, guarding access to the vehicle. As soon as he reached them, he was stopped by Uncle Gary. "Gotta hurry if we're gonna find the bear that did this to Summer," Trevor said, looking up from under his Stetson and removing aviator sunglasses. The man nodded in return. "Summer's inside. Her mother's with her." "What's her name?" "Kathy." The interior odor was musty and musky, but not the strong stench he'd expected. It was as if a child this precious was incapable of it. Carpeting was stained, mostly consisting of streams of damp leaves and grimy soil. Clearly the body had been in the water, resulting in an almost total absence of blood. Only a streak of red across a cleaved basketball jersey. Family didn't even know anything was wrong until they noticed Summer missing and frantically went searching for her in the woods. They'd been the ones to fish out both upper and lower portions, the mother on her knees now prayerfully attempting to reassemble her daughter. Coroners were driving away with her within the hour, the scene now a regular mess of press, state troopers, and firefighters. Trevor had been dismissed to begin prepping his report back at the station, but he wanted to see where she'd been discovered first. What he stumbled upon were dirty gobs of fibrous stuffing strewn everywhere, even the lake's waterline. What was it, though, and where had it all come from? Certainly not that teddy bear clutched so lovingly inside the child's fingertips. There was enough here to fill 50 such toys. Back at the office, Trevor hit a green key-shift stroke and sent his filings into a digital portal for network approval. Shift was nearly over now. He could go home, or he could go grab a plate of habanero hot wings with Officer Kendrickson. What he ended up doing instead was driving out to the morgue. It was well outside the park, and he arrived just after dusk. He was greeted by a night shift secretary who steered him towards the door of the assistant technician, Pam McCann. The ranger pretended to rap his knuckles, providing the knock-knock noise with his voice. "Help you?" Pam asked without looking up from a laptop. He let himself inside. "I'm a ranger with the Park Forest Service, ma'am." She now looked up and smiled. "Don't ma'am me, mister. I'm 2 years behind you. Saw you wrestle as a senior for Montana State when I was a sophomore at CU Boulder." "Good memory." "You hear about the bear attack?" Trevor nodded. "Yeah, but not this morning's. Understand there was one last spring, too?" Pam nodded in return. "Buy me a beer?" The bar was packed with country and western garb, drink, and line dancing. As with most such establishments, the music was far stronger than any of the ales on tap. Pam dragged Trevor over to a corner booth. "I call this my coroner's corner." They received 2 frosty, amber-headed glasses and a tray of peanuts. He paid the tab with a tap of his smartphone, and the server winked at Pam. "Seems they know you in here." "Better. My dad owns this place. That's Bud behind the bar." "I'm beginning to see how this family scam works now." She grinned. "I'll make it up to you with a plate of cheese sliders. On the house." He flagged a hand. "About that bear attack earlier this year, It was a kid, too, right? She bit down a lower lip with 2 front teeth. It was. Foreign family. Can't recollect what country now. Here on vacation? They ever bagged the animal? No, they didn't. Your boys tracked one bull for a week, but his scat was clear, and with no bite radius to match against, which genuinely shocked me. Anything else stand out to you about it? Troopers found bundles of material, like ribbons of fiberglass insulating or something. No idea what this thing was rolling around in, but the boy was coiled in it like a cocoon. She read concern in the eyes across the table from her. You found it at this morning's attack, too? Yeah, and not only that. Can't for the life of me figure out why it's not caching the prey. What do you mean? Wasn't any bite marks, right? No partial digestion? And from what you're telling me, the spring attack was the same. Let's say a bear's not hungry, right? It'll cache food sources for later. Maybe a startled mama bear then, she said. And the cubs would have fed, he said. She shook her head. It's all so sad. I feel terrible for these families. Can you imagine? The two chatted for another hour or so before she gathered a rhinestone purse. Listen, school day tomorrow. Gotta get home to my son. Next time's on me. Tell your daddy's welcome, Pam. Don't be a stranger, Trev. T-Top Firebird parked out front of a log cabin, music and headlights going dark as Pam cut the engines. She was carrying an armload of groceries and dropped a key in her haste to unlock the front door. As she stooped, groping the welcome mat with a palm, she couldn't shake the feeling there was something in the wood, staring, moving. Then the cricket choir went dead, and she went bolt upright like a cattle prod. Pam recovered the key and hustled inside fast as she was able. Slamming the door closed with hyperventilating breaths, she parted slatted blinds with her fingertips, looking out, eyes darting left and right. The porch light's motion sensor timed out, and the property line fell black. Get a hold of yourself, girl. Bobcat more than likely, she reassured herself, shoving the conversation she just concluded with Trevor far from her thoughts. She glanced over. Her boy was asleep on a game console, face down in a plate of microwavable nachos. Oh, Garrett. Won't bother asking whether you brushed your teeth. He was in the 3rd grade, but slender enough she could still lift and carry him in her arms upstairs to bed. Her flaxen, tow-headed son continued to snooze on her sleeve as she slipped him under race car-themed coverlets. She watched his chest peacefully rise and fall a few times, then took her own advice, brushing her teeth and hitting the sack. At 2 a.m., someone knocked downstairs. At this hour? Who in their right? Only maybe it wasn't someone. This noise didn't sound much like knuckles rapping on a wooden doorframe, more like bumping the outside of the house, painting it with some heavy fur pad and claws of hard-edged bone, deliberately, repeatedly. She still refused to allow her chat with Trevor to invade her brain, but it wouldn't be denied this time. Whatever was rustling out there, it could be a bear. Was it the same one responsible for the attack on that child the previous morning? The young mother let a bare forearm slip down below the cool, vacant space where monsters live in the underside of our beds and nightmares. She fingered the cold steel of a 12-gauge her father had taught her to shoot as a teenager, pulling it taut over her CU Boulder nightshirt. A brief visit to the top drawer of a bureau produced a handful of shells. Then she braved downstairs, tossing open the front door with knotted eyebrows rivaling the fiercest mama bear in the wild. Without a second wasted, she made her meaning clear by firing a slug at the bashful moon hiding just below the tree line. "Get out of here!" she hollered louder than the shot. Nothing stirred, not even small varmints scurrying into the roughage with tails between their legs. Closest neighbor was Chuck Millet and family, but they were miles out. No matter. Whatever had come looking for trouble was gone now. Next morning, Pam awoke late for work, owing to a night of restless, stressful tossing and turning. She had a skillet of eggs going in the kitchen for Garrett, while her fingernails picked cheesy nachos from the den carpeting. "Come on, sweetie. We're both late this morning. Bus will be here in 10 minutes, she called out. She only became concerned after scraping stale tortilla chips down a gurgling garbage disposal, and her son still hadn't shown. "Hun, let's go, please." She followed a banister up towards the boy's bedroom door. Before the doorknob even turned, her nostrils caught whiff of animal dung and death. The boy's bedroom window appeared as if a grenade had been lobbed at the side of the house. Hero figurines and baseball posters laying shredded on the ground below. Just as with the other children, there were no bite marks. Unidentifiable pieces of Garrett were everywhere. A toy chest, a study desk, a closet of school bags and winter coats. The biggest identifiable chunk was still in bed, but even so, headless. Pam's heart stopped, her lips parted, and guttural woe scattered every bird in the surrounding area. Again, Trevor got the call on his pickup truck CB, hearing Irene's voice declaring the newest bear attack. A third child. Only this time, however, he knew the name. While it wasn't officially on park grounds, it was close enough that rangers were invited to join the jurisdiction. While the sheriff's department had competing theories why any bear would climb up a child's second-story windowsill, everyone was agreed that this was the same animal, had to be found, and had to be destroyed. Any doubts Trevor may have had were answered upon reaching Garrett's bedroom, where sheriffs were busy winding spools of stringy material from the scene. It was as if a fabric store had exploded. Young man wished he could comfort Pam, but she was gone. Rumor was floating around she'd been committed for self-harm once the first EMS got on site. "Y'all gonna bag this thing or what?" grumbled a gruff old sheriff that went by Grim Masterson. "Hell, I'd do it for you, if and you can't." "Last time Sheriff's Department got involved with Cullen, we lost a half-dozen sleuth in a week," remarked Irene, entering. "Yeah, so what, little lady? You'd prefer a half-dozen more Vicks, I suppose." Now a young deputy named Leonard Pelt stepped forth. "Y'all know it's those Pisleys, right? Growlers? Grizzly bull crossed with some huge polar mama. One family, all from the same pair. Look it up. Migrating down from Alaska like the Kodiaks, through Vancouver Canuck land, straight to our doorstep. Global climate warming, that's what done it." Trevor now chimed in. "Can I ask a question?" No, can you, youngin'?" replied Sheriff Grim Masterson. "Sure hope you're a lot smarter than Leonard here." "What?" said Leonard Peltz. "What's on your mind, Rains?" asked Irene. "It's getting late in the season. Older bulls are getting hungry and desperate before hibernation. But that boy last spring, Summer Summers yesterday morning, now Bud McCann's grandson, ain't never heard of no rogue what only targets kids." Everyone looked around without a word of answer. There was no good answer. News regarding the park's multiple bear attacks had gone global, but added payroll for spotters and riflemen afforded 2 weeks of relative, merciful calm. Trevor was at his desk reading all reports on the springtime incident. Who were these people, anyways? Family was Japanese, 4 all told. Dad, Mom, an adult daughter, and a minor. They'd retrieved the boy's head from a spruce 75 yards from his pajamas and 100 from the torso. Not one lateral incisor impression nor canine indentation. This thing, did it ever eat? And that inexplicable wadding. Were it not for the sheer, raw power of these blows, the ranger might seriously consider this was some depraved human acting out. He was hoping to be on the bear hunt with Officer Spencer, but Irene put him on rookie duties. After lunchtime, he'd be tasked with offering free tours along some of the more popular hiking trails. Trevor drove out and finished up after only 90 minutes. Weren't many takers today. Visitors were petering out this time of year. Scary bear attacks didn't help matters much either. He was just about to head back to the station, yet one tourist lingered. She was a petite, raven-haired young lady introducing herself as Amiko. "Thank you for your time, for the tour, I mean to say," she said. "You're welcome. I'm Ranger Trevor Rains. Your haircut was longer in the photos, but I recognize you. Earlier this past spring, Sato family. That was your little brother." She lowered her head, removing dark sunglasses. "Kenji. He was beautiful. Came back to visit the campsite where it all happened that night. Something inside me wouldn't settle till I did." "Can I give you a lift?" "Was hoping you'd offer, 'cause my tour bus just left." 20 minutes later, Trevor pulled onto a side service road Amiko pointed out. She led him through a jagged trail of jutting rock, at one point even taking him by the hand down a steep grade. "You a student, or what do you do back home?" "You asking me whether I'm in a relationship?" The ranger smiled. "Dunno. Maybe all strangers hold hands in your neighborhood." She looked back and returned the smile. "Are we strangers? Maybe I'm just worried you're going to slip. I'm prima ballerina for the National Ballet of Japan." "Parents must be very proud." "My mom and dad are both prodigies. Made sure all their children were, too. Truth be told, Kenji was the only one that was truly gifted. My older brother and I just worked hard." "How are your folks, you and your older brother, holding up?" "It's just me and my parents now." She stopped before a windswept grove under the wide arms of a cedar. Amiko made sure to lock eyes with Trevor, then gestured over her shoulder. She guided him another 1,000 yards, police tape, scraps of tarp, and a bent tent pole littering the sawgrass. "You familiar with Aokigahara?" she asked. He shrugged. "Well, Mount Fuji is known for its volcanics, same as Yellowstone. That and one particular forest. People go there to end their life. A few years ago, my older brother realized neither of us could compare with Kenji's talent. He blamed my parents, said they loved him more. He told me he was going to Aokigahara, but that he'd return. Begged him to get help. He promised he wasn't going there to die, but to bargain with the demon of that forest. Took months to find him, next to trees filled with baby dolls." Amiko noticed Trevor knelt down near a thicket of aspens. Something was snagged in the bark, flapping in the wind. She stepped backwards, away, not towards. "You don't need to be scared. It's nothing," he said. "Probably someone's old shirt or something. See the needlework? Hand-stitched. Collect it just in case." It was impossible to ignore Amiko's silence on the drive back to her inn. Trevor tried a few non-sequiturs, but nothing doing. Then the CB cut in, Irene's voice frantic. One word especially. "Trank." "Gotta take this. Sorry, you're gonna have to tag along." He banked the steering wheel into a hard U-turn, work boot flattening the accelerator. 10 minutes later, the 4x4 braked into plumes of dust and gravel across from a parade of other Forest Service vehicles. The ranger grabbed his tranquilizer rifle off a rear window rack, plus 12 cc's of Telazol, ketamine, and xylazine from a backseat cooler. He left her alone inside the cab, disappearing into a swarm of coworkers. She looked down at the filmy evidence baggie on the far seat, fearful of the stitchwork corduroy they'd just recovered. "Tanker, where they want me?" Trevor asked a lumbering, baby-faced ranger. "Dunno, mate," replied Tanker. "Irene's not here yet. Maybe on that high ridge up yonder." Trevor hustled up a knoll where 3 other rangers were dug in a skirmish line, grousing and growling, radiating from shrubbery 500 yards ahead. "What do we got? Anybody hurt?" "Everyone's fine. Spencer's got it trapped in that cave," whispered Hooley, a ranger hired a month after him. Officer Spencer was encroaching foot by foot, inch by inch, towards overgrowth darkening the cave mouth. Hooley held her breath. Trevor loaded his weapon. In 3 bounds, the bear was at top speed, surprising Spencer from a pool opposite the cave. Humped shoulders and slouched haunches launched from a cannon, the 200-pound man blown from its path like a bug in a hurricane. The thing advanced 25 more feet before being reduced to a heap of straw-colored fur and a noggin of drugged darts. "Nighty-night, baby," said Spencer, coughing as he got back to his feet, beating the dust from pinstriped slacks with an Aussie slouch hat. "Nice shooting, folks." His team erupted in hoots and hollers, Hooley and Tanker scurrying up with muzzles and blankets, joyfully snapping selfies. Trevor approached the hero of the hour. "Reckless, Spence, you bagged a subadult." "Don't start with me, Rook. Not now," retorted Officer Spencer. "See that red tent over there? This kindly fellow was seen trucking through a campsite by the south gates an hour ago." "An attack?" "No, thank God, not this time." "Oh, what? You're going to tell me those paws aren't mature enough to knock the life out of a kid?" Trevor let it go, leaving to go inspect the lair. He clicked on a flashlight from his utility belt, scanning the floor. Bones. Berries. Not a hint of stuffing or padding anywhere. A billowy evening breeze blew in through linen curtains. "Sorry I went so cold on you earlier," said Amiko, floating back and forth between a kitchenette and her room's breakfast bar. A hot teacup was set down on the coffee table in front of Trevor. "Yeah, shoulder's still pretty frozen. Was it something I said?" She shook her head. "Whole reason I came back to America is to tell someone what I didn't share back in April. Don't know about the other children, but that bear today didn't kill my little brother. Saw what attacked Kenji with my own eyes." "Can you describe it to me?" She looked at him hesitantly. "My father had a teddy bear his grandmother made by hand when he was a baby. Years later, my mother mended it from a corduroy jacket. Over the years, we took to calling it Patches. After my little brother was born, he wouldn't be parted from it. Tell you this because the day my older brother was found in Aokigahara, Patches was clutched between his decaying fingertips. Told prefecture police to leave the toy with all the other tree dolls. Imagine my shock when Kenji found Patches while hiking here in Yellowstone. Didn't know what to say. He was so happy. Night of the attack, my little brother was asleep in a pup tent. First heard him screaming. As soon as I stuck my head out, I saw his tent flailing, inflating, hair ripping through, forelimbs thick as tree trunks covered in the same squares as that old jacket. Saw it just before it fled into the wood, foaming, dripping jaws stained with my little brother's blood. It leered at me with the same deadness I saw in my older brother's rotting eye sockets." He sighed deeply, rising to his feet. "Thanks for the tea." Amiko rushed over, pressing her hips against the door, blocking Trevor's exit. "Don't go," she pleaded. "That wasn't a shirt you found. It came from Patches." "What do you want me to do?" "Duty officer signs me out a sidearm, can of bear mace, and a tranq rifle to keep the peace. Sounds to me like you need to tell your story to an exorcist." 10 miles down the road, the ranger was hand-surfing nighttime air whistling by a rolled window. He shook his head a few times. Poor thing was so mixed up. Couldn't cope with the loss. Wasn't sure how long she'd planned on staying in the country. He'd check on her one more time tomorrow, just to be sure she was okay. It began sprinkling, then raining. He switched on the wipers. Between the blades' squeaky passes was someone down the road with hazard lights flashing. It was a woman helicoptering her arms amidst the downpour, more than likely caught off guard by the weather and lost traction control. Trevor activated the roof lights, pulling over at a safe distance. "Ma'am, what's wrong?" She could hardly speak, choking between screams and swallows of rainwater. "Bailey, my granddaughter. We stopped so she could, and a man in a bear suit stole her." "Excuse me, ma'am? Come again. A man in a bear suit?" She went catatonic, collapsing onto the bumper of her 1965 Roadster convertible. "Stay with me, ma'am. Which way did they go?" The grandma pointed at a broken reflector sign. There was a hand-sewn patch entangled on it, entwined around it. "Get in your car, ma'am." The ranger called for backup on his CB and geared up. He then stroked the area with a flashlight before trekking into the forest with every armament at his disposal. There'd be no rescue. He knew instantly by the lack of screaming and the amount of blood. Trevor wasn't following a trail so much as an eruption. Whatever had torn Bailey limb from limb hadn't fled either. It was still here. The reek forced him to inhale through his lips, anything to avoid using his nostrils. He unholstered his Koenig TP9. This might be a psychopath in a costume after all. A real bear would never be this shy after a kill. Instinct. It would challenge him, defend its territory. The flashlight's beam silhouetted fluffy cotton dangling inside the hollow of a tree ringlet. He knew beyond any doubt something was waiting for him on the other side. The ranger had never experienced paralyzing fear before, and sure wasn't about to start tonight. He took a step. He didn't need to take another. Patches emerged from the shadows, not charging on four legs, but striding on two. The gun's clip emptied. Next, the can of pepper spray emptied. Lastly, the tranquilizers emptied. Bullets and hypodermics found no bloodstream, though, only cloth. The creature loomed over Trevor, lowering its misshapen head, plastic eyelashes blinking, tongue lolling stupidly. It was in that moment he knew Patches wasn't going to harm him. Somehow, it couldn't. It was forbidden. The air was suffocating with bear mace, and the ranger retreated from the fumes on bended hand and knee. He turned back, looking again. It was still hunched near the logs, whimpering, as if wishing for a playful hug. Trevor stayed till dawn, attending to Bailey's grandmother, reporting to EMS and helping Park Services secure the woodlands. Irene told him to go home and get some shut-eye before he keeled over from exhaustion. He didn't. "Sorry I didn't believe you," said Trevor. "It sounded so crazy." Amiko left the lavatory, hands behind her back. "You scraped your head out there." He furrowed a thick brow, wincing when he dabbed a thumb at his temples. "Forgot. They gave me an ice pack back at the scene. Left it in the pickup." "I can do better. Lay back, please," she instructed. The young man reclined over the inn's compact futon sofa, his head in her lap. She knew the alcohol swab was painful, but the warm washcloth soothing. "You were a footballer?" "Wrestler." "Getting the idea you're one of those guys that act shocked anytime a gal pays attention. What would we call that? Old-fashioned?" She finished with a butterfly Band-Aid and a kiss on the forehead. "Hey, come on," he reacted. "They think they're tracking a grizzly." "You didn't tell them what you saw?" she asked. He sighed, slumping his head between her palms. That grandma did. Of course they said she was hysterical, and to be honest, she was. "It's your brother. How do we stop him?" "It's not my brother anymore. Something else. Something preternatural." "So I need to tell Irene she's about to lose hundreds of kids a year?" Amiko tapped her fingertips at her lips. "Do you know why werewolves hate silver, vampires crucifixes? Catholic sacramentals. Cross is obvious. Silver refers to miraculous metals." Trevor sat up. "Really hoping you're building to something." "What I'm building to is, I believe. We have to try." Trevor called in sick the next day and drove out to a Carmelite chapel with Amiko. The grounds had no parking as such, so the pickup pulled under the marble eyes of St. Francis. Small old men in hooded robes puttered here and there in a garden, hoeing or planting, paying them no mind. The brothers wouldn't speak, yet with coaxing pointed out a stucco office off the main house. After a minute, a balding friar answered the door chimes. He was mute by vow, too, only he encouraged them to speak freely. The two glanced at one another, handing over a smartphone displaying the recent bear attacks at the park. "Father, my family's Catholic," she began. "Understand places can be haunted, people, animals too." The priest nodded pensively, returning their device. "What about objects? What would you recommend if hell possessed a teddy bear?" He paused before inviting them indoors, leading the way to a brick and mortar chapel where housekeepers were hard at work about their duties. After a short wait, a woman drew near with a small package wrapped in brown butcher paper, tied tight with jute twine. "Was told to tell you that this rosary belonged to Padre Pio. Be very careful with it, please. While you have no bishop's authority, it will expel the manifestation from the object, at which time you must act quickly to destroy it." Days of investigating. No sign of Patches. Amiko adjusted her return ticket, extending the flight by an extra week. One evening, while enjoying takeout barbecue inside the 4x4, it occurred to Trevor that they really didn't have a plan. Should have killed me that night by all rights. Seemed powerless to do so, though. Figure I can get close to it again. But then what? A prayer? I'm not religious. She smirked, licking sauce from the corners of her lips. "My parents are going to make you convert before they'll let you marry me." He raised an eyebrow. "Eat your pepper steak." The CB squawked with Officer Spencer's voice. "All units, a predator just tripped Section 21. "How far?" she asked. "Other side of the park." They rocketed away, arriving 40 minutes later. By now, Officer Spencer was babbling like Bailey's grandmother, locking himself inside his cruiser. Irene was livid, demanding Tanker and Hooley get their gear, but they'd already seen what Spencer had seen and would rather see the devil dance before wandering into those pine woods ever again. Trevor didn't feel like explaining what he and Amiko were doing with handfuls of road flares and a chainsaw, so they made an end run around the Rangers. They found Spencer's Aussie slouch hat in the mud, trampled saplings, and displaced leaves from a fresh chase. An unhealthy fog snaked between trees, 2 feet off the forest floor, thick as chowder. This vapor collected itself inside a reedy marsh, a nature-made cistern for water runoff. "Rotten eggs? Are we near a geyser?" she wanted to know. "Yeah, sulfuric," he replied. "It's a new cauldron." A paw slathered in rooty vines and patchy cloth plunged from bubbling gases, 2 hellacious eyeballs dredging from misty void. Amiko hid behind Trevor. "It only scared Spence, Hooley, and Tanker. Pretty sure it just attacks children," he said, ripping the chainsaw's pull cord, metal teeth snarling to life. She unwrapped the old prayer beads, keeping them handy. Patches stood full, spoiled spume puddling between a tufted tail. It seemed to have forgotten the ranger, but definitely not the figure cowering at his back. Patches lurched forward with its button nose, fangs snaggled and popping. Amiko tossed the rosary into the mouth. The teddy bear thrashed painfully, maniacally. It spat the relic out, but it was too late. Eyeballs bulging, otherworldly cream milking from its gums. Trevor went to work with the motorized blade, lobbing off a paw, a forearm, chewing inside a belly full of seams, head to tail. Padding spewed out like streams of synthetic blood. patches collapsing near a gasiform stump. Amiko saw the body of her older brother, real as life inside all that fake fur, before dematerializing into a skeletonized corpse. "We gonna finish this?" she asked. Trevor kicked over the slumping, amputated husk, sliding into the burping geyser. He dropped the chainsaw, uncapping one of the road flares. Irene heard a massive explosion, turning her head to witness a spire of fiery green spiking into the skyline like the northern lights. Amiko woke up in the burn ward, 3rd degree in spots. Not nearly as bad as it might have been had Trevor not leapt to protect her. He'd require skin grafts. A year later, the two were in Kyoto, exchanging golden bands inside Miyazu Catholic Church. Year after that, Amiko threw her arms around Trevor, tears in her eyes, pregnant with their first child, a baby boy. The crib came to be decorated with a musical safari mobile and many colorful toys. Just no teddy bears.